Karen yells at ice cream truck for attracting strangers. The air was thick with the scent of sunscreen, barbecue smoke, and summer freedom. Then came the unmistakable chime, the whimsical melody of the ice cream truck drifting through the breeze like a Pied Piper's tune. It was the song of joy, the anthem of sweet indulgence, and as always, it worked its magic. Children scattered toward their homes to beg for coins and small bills, forming a swarm as the white and pastel-colored truck rolled slowly down Maple Crescent, coming to a cheerful stop near the cul-de-sac. Behind the wheel was Ernesto, a familiar face and a beloved figure in the neighborhood for more than a decade. With his soft, lined face, always smiling eyes, and the worn baseball cap perched on his head, he looked exactly the same every summer, like someone who had found peace in simplicity and joy in sharing. He called out greetings as he handed over rocket pops, drumsticks, and character-shaped creamsicles, laughing at the kids' messy hands and wide grins. Everything about the moment felt idyllic, suspended in that golden glow that only summer afternoons could provide. Then came the sharp sound of flip-flops hitting pavement with purpose. A woman emerged from her two-story house on the corner, striding down the driveway like a general marching into battle. Her wide sunglasses were perched on a face set with fury, and her perfectly manicured fingers clutched a phone and a laminated neighborhood watch badge. Her expression was one of complete disdain, as though the ice cream truck were not a symbol of summer joy, but a declaration of war. Her name was Karen, and anyone who had lived on Maple Crescent for more than a few months knew of her. She wasn't part of the HOA, but she acted as if she owned the entire zip code. She had once demanded a neighbor move a wind chime because it was spiritually disruptive. She had reported a 12-year-old for selling lemonade without a permit. And now, her latest target was the jingling, jolly bringer of frozen happiness. Without pausing, she marched straight to the truck and banged her palm against the side window. The children nearest her flinched back, and one little girl began to cry. Ernesto, startled but still smiling, leaned out to greet her. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Would you like something cold?" "Turn that music off," Karen barked, immediately. Ernesto blinked. "The music, that's how the kids know I'm here." "Exactly," she snapped, gesturing broadly at the gathered crowd of children. "You're drawing them in with that noise, and it's attracting attention from God knows who. Strangers could be driving through just to follow that sound. It's practically a siren call to criminals." There was a stunned silence around them. The kids stared, wide-eyed. Some parents who had been watching from their porches now rose to their feet and began approaching. Ernesto's smile faded slightly as he tried to understand. "Ma'am, I've been coming here for 10 years. Everyone knows me. I have a license, background checks, health permits." "Don't you talk to me about permits," she cut him off, voice rising. "This neighborhood was safe until that noise started up again this year. People I don't recognize are walking by. Cars I don't know are driving past too slow. And you're causing all of it." One dad chuckled under his breath, and Karen whipped around like a hound on a scent. "Is this funny to you, Brian?" "Yeah, kinda," Brian replied, sipping from a can of soda and motioning to his two daughters, who clutched their popsicles protectively. "You're yelling about kids eating ice cream like it's a threat to national security." Karen's face flushed. "You think this is just about ice cream? It's about safety. What happens when someone uses this truck's music to hide their own agenda? Have you thought about that?" Ernesto raised his hands, trying to calm the rising tide. "I just play the same tune every year. Do your ears hang low? That's all. It's a tradition, not a conspiracy." "I'm calling the HOA," Karen declared, stepping back and raising her phone like a sword. "This is unacceptable. You'll be hearing from the board, and probably the police." A murmur of disbelief swept through the growing crowd. One of the teens standing nearby pulled out his phone and began recording, narrating softly. "Karen tries to cancel the ice cream man, day 1. The younger kids looked confused, scared, and disappointed all at once, while their parents began to quietly reassure them. As Karen stalked back to her house, still muttering to herself, Ernesto exhaled slowly. He offered free cones to the kids who hadn't yet gotten theirs and tried to smooth over the mood with small jokes and gentle words. Still, the joy of the moment had been fractured. The music, once so cheerful, now hung in the air like a question mark. Would he be allowed to come back? Would the neighborhood choose sweetness, or would it bend to the sourness of one voice? Back at her home, Karen was already typing a furious post in the neighborhood Facebook group, her thumbs flying across the screen like talons. The headline read, "Warning, ice cream truck bringing strangers to our street." She added a blurry photo of Ernesto's truck, followed by a long, breathless rant peppered with caps lock, demands for justice, and vague threats about making this go viral. She hit post, poured herself a glass of white wine, and stared out the window at the truck, still parked down the street, the faint chime playing again as more children arrived. Karen narrowed her eyes. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The following morning dawned bright and humid, the promise of another scorcher clinging to the air even before the sun had fully risen. By mid-morning, the cicadas had resumed their incessant song, and the hum of lawnmowers reverberated from yard to yard. But for Karen, there was only one thing on her mind: the ice cream truck and the menace it posed to the sanctity of her suburban utopia. She had barely slept, fueled by a mix of Chardonnay and righteous fury. The Facebook post she'd made the evening before had already gained traction, with comments pouring in from concerned parents, sarcastic teens, and bemused neighbors. While some supported her, people with vague fears about new traffic, and people we don't recognize walking around, many more mocked her, responding with gifs, memes, and dismissive replies that only deepened her resolve. To Karen, the laughter only confirmed how blind the neighborhood had become, how numb they were to the creeping threat of disorder disguised as tradition. By 10 o'clock, she had printed out 25 copies of a flyer she designed in Microsoft Word, a poorly formatted document titled "The Truth About Ice Cream Trucks." It warned of increased foot traffic, unsupervised children, and the ever-present risk of predators using music as a cover. Each point was underlined in red, and clip art of an ice cream cone frowning menacingly adorned the bottom. She marched through the neighborhood with a stapler and tape dispenser in hand, affixing the flyers to telephone poles, community mailboxes, and even the wooden back of the neighborhood bulletin board near the park entrance. She didn't care when a jogger raised an eyebrow at her, or when a mother pushing a stroller tore the flyer down and tossed it into the trash can with a disgusted grunt. Karen simply replaced it with another copy, lips pursed in quiet defiance. By noon, her next step was complete. She had called the HOA president, an overly diplomatic man named Carl, and insisted on an emergency meeting. Carl had tried to explain that emergency meetings were for things like gas leaks or broken water mains, not ice cream trucks. But Karen had overruled him with a barrage of hyperbolic claims and veiled legal threats, declaring she would bring documentation, witness statements, and video evidence to prove that the truck was not just a nuisance but a danger. Carl reluctantly agreed to squeeze her into the agenda of the monthly HOA meeting scheduled for the next day, clearly hoping that giving her a few minutes would pacify her enough to let it go. Karen, of course, took it as a victory. Meanwhile, Ernesto remained blissfully unaware of the growing storm. That afternoon, he returned to Maple Crescent right on schedule, his truck freshly cleaned, the freezer humming with new stock, and his heart light. He waved at the kids as they ran to greet him, offering new flavors he'd just added and playing a new remix of his usual jingle. He didn't notice at first that the number of children was slightly smaller than usual, or that some of the parents stood further back with more guarded expressions. He didn't realize that several had seen Karen's post, and though they didn't agree with her tone, were now watching more cautiously out of sheer suggestion. Karen, however, had noticed. She watched through slitted blinds, her phone in one hand, already recording. She zoomed in on the small group gathered around the truck, narrating in a hushed, dramatic voice like she was filming a documentary on invasive species. "You see them gathering," she whispered, drawn by the sound. "It looks innocent, But how long before someone with bad intentions follows the same music? She had bookmarked several articles on her iPad, some barely reputable, about crimes that had occurred vaguely near ice cream trucks, ready to quote them at the meeting. She was preparing her speech like a lawyer prepping for court, scribbling notes and anticipating every counterargument. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the cicadas quieted, the neighborhood Facebook group lit up once more. Karen had posted a new video, a shaky clip of Ernesto handing a popsicle to a boy wearing a superhero cape. In the background, Karen's voice could be heard saying, "Strangers with children. Where are the parents? Who's watching?" She captioned it. "Just another example of why we must stop this threat now before something happens." The comments came faster this time. Some people laughed outright. One woman sarcastically asked if she'd like to ban mail carriers too, since they also visit daily and interact with strangers. A local teen made a parody video using Karen's audio over footage of his dog begging for snacks, but others weren't as amused. One father, new to the neighborhood, messaged the group asking if anyone knew the ice cream man's background. Another woman wondered if it was true that ice cream trucks didn't need constant police inspections. The next morning, Ernesto felt it. The energy was off. Fewer children came out. One mom, usually the first to wave, gave him a tight-lipped nod and stayed inside. Even some of the older kids hesitated at the curb, glancing at their parents for permission that didn't come. When he drove away, he found himself glancing in the side mirror, wondering if he had done something wrong. Had he missed a rule? Had someone complained? His heart felt heavy, but he shook it off. Maybe it was just the heat. That evening, the buzz around the HOA meeting reached a fever pitch. More people than usual planned to attend, not because they cared about community budgets or lawn guidelines, but because they had heard Karen was planning to present a dossier on the ice cream truck. Rumors of her meltdown had spread, and everyone wanted to see what she'd do next. Teenagers joked about live streaming it. Parents debated whether to speak up in Ernesto's defense. Even Carl, the HOA president, privately messaged a few board members, warning them to be ready for theatrical nonsense. Karen, meanwhile, laid out her outfit carefully: a crisp white blouse, beige slacks, and the same oversized sunglasses she had worn the first day of the confrontation. She rehearsed her speech in the mirror, timing herself, editing her notes, making sure she looked confident, composed, and prepared. She had printed color photos, highlighted passages from articles, and even prepared a closing statement demanding a vote on banning ice cream trucks from the neighborhood permanently. As far as she was concerned, this was not just a meeting, it was her moment of vindication. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, and Ernesto sat alone in his parked truck at the edge of town, counting his receipts and staring at the list of neighborhoods on his route. He circled Maple Crescent with a hesitant hand, wondering if tomorrow would be the last time he'd be welcome there. The community center where the monthly HOA meeting was held had never seen such a crowd. Folding chairs had been added hastily to accommodate the unexpected wave of residents pouring in, and even then, people were left standing against the back wall, whispering and murmuring about the infamous post that had drawn them here. A few had brought popcorn and sodas, as if preparing for a comedy show, while others clutched notepads or neighborhood policy handbooks, unsure of whether they were about to witness something petty or profound. The air buzzed with anticipation, and near the front of the room, Karen sat bolt upright in her chair with a rigid composure that masked the turbulent energy bubbling just beneath her skin. Beside her, a thick binder rested on her lap, bulging with color-coded tabs, charts, and a collection of screenshots she believed would finally wake the neighborhood up from its complacent stupor. Carl, the HOA president, cleared his throat several times before beginning the meeting, clearly unsettled by the number of cell phones already recording and the dozens of curious faces staring up at him with the same eagerness usually reserved for scandalous courtroom trials. He cycled quickly through the usual agenda: budget updates, fence painting approvals, a reminder about leash laws, until finally, with a reluctant sigh, He gestured toward Cairn and announced that she had requested time to address what she had described as a community safety emergency. Cairn rose slowly, smoothed her blouse, and walked to the front of the room with the gravity of someone about to deliver a closing argument in a high-profile legal case. Her voice, when she began to speak, was calm but tight, sharpened by the tension of suppressed outrage. "Thank you, Carl," she began, turning to the audience. "Neighbors, friends, I know many of you think of me as opinionated, maybe even strict, but everything I've done for this neighborhood has always come from a place of love. I care about Maple Crescent. I care about your children. And it's because I care so deeply that I'm here tonight to expose a growing threat that has gone unchecked for too long." She paused dramatically, then flipped open her binder and pulled out the first laminated sheet, an enlarged photo of Ernesto's truck, with red arrows and circles drawn over it as if analyzing a crime scene. Gasps and stifled laughter rippled through the room. "This ice cream truck," she continued, tapping the photo, "has become a magnet for strangers. I've observed unfamiliar vehicles cruising behind it. I've seen unaccompanied adults lingering by the park during its visits. And worst of all, the music. It blares through our streets like a siren call, inviting anyone with ill intent into our safe space. Now I know some of you think this is harmless. I know many of you grew up with ice cream trucks, but times have changed. The world has changed. And we cannot afford to cling to nostalgia when it compromises our children's safety." She moved briskly through the pages, citing news articles, some from real sources, others questionably legitimate, that linked ice cream trucks to various crimes or nuisances, ignoring context and location. She presented screenshots from the Facebook group, calling out those who had mocked her, nomming usernames and reading sarcastic replies aloud with a mixture of indignation and self-pity. She even played a short clip of Ernesto handing a cone to a child, narrating over it, "Look how easy it would be for someone to exploit this moment." Her voice cracked slightly with emotion, which she did not try to hide. "I'm not saying Ernesto is dangerous," she added, though her tone implied the opposite. "But what I'm saying is, we have to be proactive. We can't wait until something happens. Do we want to be the neighborhood on the evening news because we ignored the signs?" The room was silent for a moment after she finished, a thick and uncomfortable silence broken only by the hum of the ceiling fans. Carl stood, clearly unsure how to proceed. He was about to thank Cairn and move on when another voice cut through the stillness. "May I speak?" Ernesto had arrived minutes before the meeting started and had been sitting quietly near the back, his cap clutched in his hands. Heads turned as he made his way forward, walking slowly, the usual spring in his step weighed down by the pressure of defending himself in front of dozens of skeptical eyes. He faced the room with a quiet dignity, nodding once to Cairn as he passed her. "My name is Ernesto Alvarez," he said, "and I've been serving this neighborhood for over 10 years. I know most of you. I've watched your kids grow up. I've seen birthdays, block parties, school graduations. I've brought ice cream and smiles and a little bit of summer magic to your doorsteps." He paused, voice steady but firm. "And in all that time, I've never had a complaint until now." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and held it up. "This is my vendor's license issued by the city. I've passed every inspection, background checks, health checks, noise ordinance compliance, everything. I've followed every rule because I care about doing things right." He looked out over the crowd. "I understand concerns. The world is scary sometimes, but fear should never replace facts. And fear shouldn't be aimed at someone just because they bring joy in a way that makes a little noise." A murmur of support rose from the audience, soft at first but growing. A woman in the front row stood up and said, "My son has autism. He doesn't like big social settings, but every time Ernesto's truck comes, it's the one thing he looks forward to. He talks about it for days. You're going to take that away because of one complaint." Others nodded, and one father added, "If we ban the ice cream truck, what's next? Halloween, block parties, barbecues. Where does it stop?" Cairn looked around, realizing that the tide was turning, that her carefully curated arguments were being swept aside by something she hadn't anticipated: community affection. Ernesto, without raising his voice or pointing fingers, had reminded them of something she couldn't disprove: his humanity. He was more than a truck, more than a jingle. He was part of their shared memory, their summer tradition. And while she had numbers and warnings, he had stories, connections, and trust. Carl cleared his throat again and said, "Well, I think we've heard both sides. Let's take a quick vote just to put this to rest." The result was overwhelming. Only Cairn and one older couple who often complained about lawn lengths voted to pursue restrictions on the ice cream truck. The rest raised their hands for it to stay, with some even clapping. Cairn stood stiffly, her binder held against her chest like a shield, her expression unreadable. Without a word, she turned and walked out of the meeting, the door thudding shut behind her. Ernesto didn't gloat. He simply nodded, thanked everyone, and left quietly, though several people came up to shake his hand, pat him on the back, and promise they'd always support him. That night, as he pulled his truck into the driveway at his small home, he smiled for the first time in days. The fight might not be over. Cairn wasn't one to let things go easily, but he had weathered the storm, and he knew now that most of the neighborhood was still on his side. The morning after the HOA meeting, the neighborhood of Maple Crescent hummed with fresh energy, like a town that had just survived a storm. There was a shared sense of relief in the air, unspoken but palpable, one of those subtle shifts in mood that you only notice after conflict has simmered down. Parents chatted more freely on the sidewalks. Children played without glancing toward their homes for signals of permission, and the sound of Ernesto's familiar jingle that afternoon brought a louder cheer than usual from the neighborhood kids. It was as if the entire community had rallied not just to defend the man who delivered cold treats from a pastel-colored truck, but to reclaim a part of their summer that had almost been stolen. Some had even joked online that Ernesto should be made the unofficial mayor of summer, and a few teenagers began passing around digital designs for mock campaign posters featuring his smiling face and an oversized cone in each hand. The sentiment was warm and full of pride, but not everyone shared in the celebration. Inside her perfectly manicured home, behind tightly drawn blinds and a no-soliciting sign that now bore a second sign beneath it reading "Filming in Progress," Cairn seethed. She had rewatched the recording of the meeting 3 times already, each viewing reigniting her outrage as if it were a fresh wound. She had expected resistance, yes, but not to be humiliated, not to be mocked, not to be drowned in applause for a man she firmly believed was, at best, careless and at worst, a potential danger. She scrolled through the comments on the Facebook thread again, this time with narrowed eyes, documenting usernames, taking screenshots, and even circling the worst offenders in red on her printed copies. To her, this wasn't over. It had merely evolved. If the HOA wouldn't act and the community refused to listen, then it was up to her alone to bring order to chaos. Her next move was as dramatic as it was misguided. Just after 3 o'clock, while Ernesto's truck was making its regular loop through the neighborhood, Cairn emerged from her garage with a broom in one hand and a printed petition in the other. She wore a sun hat and sunglasses despite the cloud cover, her lips pursed in that pinched expression that every child on the block had come to associate with impending doom. She didn't walk, she marched, cutting across perfectly trimmed lawns and ignoring the curious stares of neighbors. She caught up to the truck just as it slowed near the park entrance, its speakers humming with the familiar tune. Children were already lining up, change in hand, parents standing by with patient smiles. But their expressions shifted when they saw Cairn approach at full speed, broom raised like a scepter. "You have to stop," she shrieked, thrusting the broom handle toward the truck's front tire, as though she might physically halt the vehicle by sheer force of will. Ernesto hit the brakes, eyes widening as he recognized the whirlwind of indignation charging toward him. "Ma'am, please," he began, but Cairn wasn't there to talk. She spun to face the gathering crowd, arms flailing now as she raised her voice to a fever pitch. "Don't you see what's happening here?" she shouted. "This isn't about ice cream. This is about noise pollution, about unauthorized gatherings, about unknown people entering our space under the guise of fun. You've all been fooled. fooled by jingles and sprinkles. The children froze mid-step, some gripping their dollars tightly, others backing away slowly. One little girl began to cry. The parents, momentarily stunned, started to react, some pulling their kids closer, others stepping forward to intervene. But before anyone could act, Karen took her broom and slammed it into the front bumper of the truck with a loud clang, the absurdity of the act echoing across the street like a firework. Phones were already recording. Teens had pulled them out the moment she began yelling, their instincts finely tuned to Karen's antics. One boy laughed aloud, narrating in mock seriousness. "Karen goes full Mad Max on Mr. Softy, send help." Another girl whispered, "I think she just challenged the truck to a duel." Ernesto stepped out of the cab holding his hands up, not in fear but in pure disbelief. "What are you doing?" he asked, voice calm but firm. "You can't damage property just because you don't like it." "This is my neighborhood," Karen bellowed. "I have a right to protect it. That music is a menace. It lures in people from other areas, strangers, vagrants. What if one of them is dangerous? What if someone gets hurt because you made this a public spectacle?" A woman nearby, holding her son's hand, finally had enough. "You're the only one making this a spectacle, Karen. My kid just wanted an ice cream cone." Others chimed in, "Leave the man alone. This is harassment. You're scaring the kids." Karen trembled with rage, her eyes darting from phone to phone, realizing she was being recorded again. She snatched at one teen's phone, missing by inches, and stumbled. The crowd gasped, and someone yelled for her to stop. Ernesto gently approached, trying to de-escalate. "Karen, maybe you should go home and cool off," he said carefully. But Karen, feeling the walls close in, screamed, "You're all sheep. You're letting him brainwash you with sugar and music." And with that, she hurled the broomstick to the ground and stomped off, leaving behind a stunned and silent group of neighbors who, seconds later, erupted in a flurry of whispers, laughter, and shaking heads. Police were called, not to arrest Ernesto, of course, but to speak with Karen about disturbing the peace and potential property damage. An officer knocked on her door later that evening. She answered with a flurry of counter-accusations and an inch-thick stack of printed emails and screen captures she insisted were evidence. The officer, polite but clearly amused, issued a formal warning and told her the department had no legal grounds to restrict the ice cream truck unless it violated local ordinances, which it did not. Karen slammed the door before he could finish. That night, the video of Karen's confrontation with the ice cream truck hit 1 million views. Shared on every social platform, it was edited with dramatic music, freeze frames, and commentary. The title read, "Karen vs. the Ice Cream Man, Episode 3, The Broom Awakens." The meme wave was instant and relentless. A local bakery even released a cookie shaped like a broomstick in her honor, sparking a wave of new business. In contrast, Ernesto received dozens of messages of support. Parents sent thank-you notes. Kids drew pictures of him and the truck. Someone slipped a gift card into his tip jar with a note that read, "For keeping the summer sweet." Though the week had been chaotic, he went to bed that night with a soft smile, knowing now more than ever that he wasn't just tolerated, he was treasured. But Karen, sitting alone with her phone glowing in the dark, wasn't finished. The world might be laughing, but she wasn't done fighting. Not yet. The following weekend arrived beneath a clear blue sky, the kind that seemed designed specifically to mock anyone trying to stay angry. The sidewalks glowed with warmth, the flowers in garden beds looked impossibly bright, and the soft hum of cicadas created a lazy soundtrack to another sleepy summer afternoon. On Maple Crescent, the world seemed to have moved on from the chaos of the week before. Children dashed around with water guns, their feet slapping on the pavement. Adults sipped cold drinks under shaded porches, swapping stories and watching the spectacle unfold across the street, where something unexpected had begun to take shape in Ernesto's honor. A pop-up event had been organized overnight by a group of neighbors, half in support of Ernesto and half just eager to see what might happen next. It was being affectionately dubbed the Summer Scoop, a celebration of community, childhood joy, and the neighborhood's unwavering affection for the man who had become its most unlikely folk hero. Tables were set up near the corner where the ice cream truck usually parked. Parents brought folding chairs and coolers. Teens hung hand-painted signs that read things like "Ernesto for President" and "We stand with the ice cream man." There were sidewalk chalk drawings of cartoon cones and smiley faces, music from a portable speaker, and someone even rigged up a sprinkler arch for kids to run through. It had the feel of a block party thrown by a village that had decided, firmly, joyfully, that it would not be ruled by one person's bitterness. And right at the center of it all, as he arrived in his familiar pastel truck, was Ernesto, blinking back emotion as the crowd greeted him with cheers, applause, and children dancing in excitement. He parked slowly, stepped out of the cab, and found himself instantly swarmed by people offering handshakes, hugs, and folded bills they insisted were tips, not payment. Despite the celebration, not everyone was smiling. Behind a curtain in her second-floor window, Karen watched it all unfold with a look of pure disbelief. Her living room was a disaster, papers scattered everywhere, a corkboard littered with pins and twine that looked more like the set of a detective drama than the workspace of a suburban retiree. Her phone screen showed her inbox, filled with ignored messages from the HOA, a warning letter from the city about aggressive public behavior, and dozens of social media notifications that she no longer had the energy to read. The final straw had come the night before when her own sister, who lived in another state and had seen one of the viral videos, had texted her a screenshot of a broom-themed meme and added a laughing emoji. Karen had not replied. She stood there now, arms crossed, face flushed with a cocktail of embarrassment and fury. They had all turned against her, mocked her, ignored her warnings, and now they were rewarding the very thing she had tried to stop. But then her eye caught something unusual: the mayor's car. A sleek black SUV pulled up near the festivities, and out stepped a tall, composed woman in a navy blue summer dress, Mayor Holland, a familiar figure from local news segments and election flyers. She approached Ernesto with a warm handshake and presented him with a certificate, which she read aloud into a waiting microphone. "In honor of your years of community service, and in appreciation for the joy you bring to our neighborhoods, we hereby declare today Ernesto Appreciation Day." The crowd exploded in applause as photographers snapped pictures. Ernesto looked overwhelmed, humbly shaking his head and murmuring that he didn't deserve all this, but Mayor Holland placed a firm hand on his shoulder and said, "You've done more for this neighborhood's happiness than most politicians I know." Karen stepped back from the window, chest tightening. The mayor, the certificate, the crowds. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. She spun around, packing the room, muttering to herself. It was a circus, a complete surrender to ignorance. She knew there had to be something she could do to stop this once and for all. With a deep breath and a manic focus, she grabbed her phone, opened the city ordinance database, and began scrolling through every document she could find on noise pollution, mobile vendors, and zoning laws. She was so engrossed she didn't notice the growing silence outside her window until a shadow crossed her living room floor. She turned and found herself staring at two uniformed officers standing on her porch. One held a clipboard, the other carried a folded citation. She opened the door cautiously, squinting. "Ms. Karen Whitmore," one of the officers asked, "we need to speak with you about a few complaints." "What complaints?" she demanded, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "We've received multiple reports over the past week, accusations of harassment, property damage, and creating a public disturbance. We understand you may have had some disagreements with a local ice cream vendor." "I was protecting the neighborhood," she snapped, but the officers didn't flinch. One of them calmly handed her the citation. "You're being issued a formal warning," he said. "Continued behavior like last week's outburst, chasing down a vehicle, striking it with an object, yelling at children, could result in charges. We strongly recommend you refrain from any further confrontations." Karen stared at the paper in her hand, the words blurred. For the first time in days, she was speechless. The officers gave her a curt nod, turned, and left. She stood there, frozen on her porch as the sounds of laughter and celebration continued down the street. The world had moved on. The neighborhood had chosen joy over outrage, connection over suspicion. And she had isolated herself completely. Back at the celebration, the sun began to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the pavement. Children licked melting ice cream from their hands and faces, couples danced to soft music, and teens posted clips of Ernesto's honorary moment online with captions like "The Scoop King of Maple Crescent." The mayor had left, but her declaration lingered in the air, stamped on every smiling face. Ernesto stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, watching it all with a heart full of gratitude. When one little girl tugged on his sleeve and handed him a crayon drawing of his truck surrounded by hearts, he knelt down, hugged her gently, and smiled wider than he had in years. As the truck rolled away that evening, music playing proudly, the community waved him off like he was family. And in a way, he was. Not just a man with a freezer full of treats, but a symbol of what the neighborhood really valued: kindness, tradition, and the small joys that made life feel like summer. Karen closed her door. Alone in the growing dark, she pulled the curtains shut for good.